we're going to talk about Azure virtual machines today, or infrastructure as a service in Azure, and specifically how you can automate this building out these farms and machines in an easier way. So any developer can set up their farms in Azure so much easier. So you don't have to carry around these brick tops. Instead of you can use your iPad or whatever to access a virtual machine. So work with the Surface, for instance, and still have a big farm running in Azure. That's how I work. I used to carry around a big laptop before with 32 gigs of RAM and a terabyte of SSDs, and it killed my back. But now I'm using my Surface 3 and provisioning machines in Azure instead. And I'm using my MSD account money to actually have those machines up and running. The interesting thing with this session is that the Azure platform is constantly evolving, and when Steve asked us before Christmas what we want to talk about, this is was the original title. And the project I worked on then, I built out a set of PowerShell scripts based on an XML configuration, so you could configure your farm, etc., and had that running. Since this morning, it's one line of PowerShell, basically, doing the same thing provided by Microsoft to us. And that's what we're going to demo, actually. So I had a couple of other ideas on the way as well that we discussed throughout the session, but it's so easy, and everything will be are actually right now published on GitHub, the scripts and everything you need to build out the domain controller and the SharePoint developer machine. And it takes 2 hours to run, so that script. But I condensed that down to a video of 10 minutes. We go through what's happening during that time. So, but first of all, I think my idea with this is a couple of things. That you should understand Azure infrastructure. You should be able to run these scripts and provision your farm yourself using the stuff on GitHub. But also understand how you can tweak the different resources and tweak your machines to get the most out of the performance, etc. So there's a couple of tips and tricks in the end, depending on how long the demos take, etc. We go through them as well. But first of all, sorry, my name is Wictor Wilén, work for Avanade in Sweden. I'm the group manager for our collaboration unit in Sweden, and been working both as a developer, but more lately as an architect and IT pro. And I spend a lot of time with Azure virtual machines and Azure in general. So the agenda is, first of all, we go through the different IaaS options, because I think that's important, because I mentioned developer machines sometimes, but you can run production code or other type of codes in Azure and your SharePoint forms there. And I want to tell you how we've done with different customers and internal as well. Talk about the setup and configuration, and specifically the Azure Resource Manager, which all of you should know or learn about and study later, because that's an awesome feature or awesome service in Azure. And then some recommendations. So, why would you use Azure instead of hosting it in your own data centers or hosting your development machines on your laptops? First of all, it's about optimizing costs. It's expensive buying those brick tops. It's expensive having your own data centers, etc., etc. And a guaranteed uptime, 99.95%, that is quite hard to achieve in your own data centers. It's much faster using virtual machines in Azure. If one machine breaks, just kill that machine and spin up a new one. So much easier doing. So we reduce operations, and we can be more agile. And that both from a developer perspective. If we create some crazy code that kills our farm, basically, instead of troubleshooting that, we can just spin up a new machine. If you're on your own developer machine, you have to copy files between, optimize the VHDs to fit into your 256 gigabyte SSD. It's unlimited storage in the cloud, basically. Just kill that machine, and storage is cheap as well up there. So you can have 15 different virtual machines for 15 different customers or whatever, or 15 different configurations. Storage doesn't cost you anything. But also being more agile in IT. So IT operations, if you're working at a large company, IT might be those who provisions your virtual machines. So they can be more agile, and when you request a new virtual machine, it should be up and running within 3 hours or something like that. And there's a couple of different ways that you can actually use Azure IAAS for, and specifically for SharePoint, that's in that context we talk about this. Of course, hosting SharePoint farms, intranets, extranets, public-facing.com sites, etc., etc. You can host everything in Azure. You can use either connected to your own premises data centers using tunnels and your own domain controls, etc. Or you can run it totally separate from your on-premises environment. Disaster recovery, and with customers, this is most common scenario. Basically, you have an on-premises farm, but you need a second data center for that disaster recovery. So what we do then often is that we set up some kind of replication with the data from the on-prem to the cloud, and that's most often the content databases, some configuration, etc. And the nice thing with it is that we don't have to have all the machines running in Azure. We only need the SQL servers and domain controllers up and running. The rest can be shut down. So in case they have 10 virtual machines or 15 or 20, it's only the SQL servers and domain controllers that must be up and running. So that's a cost saver. And also, you don't have to have the same specs on these machines. It might be a little bit slower. It's a disaster recovery environment. But the idea is to replicate data to some other location than your own data center. Staging or QA. This is something I built with customers as well. They have their farm on premises, but they use Azure as a staging and test environment. Just because you can just kill that farm and create a new farm if your new release or whatever kills that farm. So it's very easy to do. And everything, of course, can be scripted out. Another interesting thing is when customers are moving to Office 365, they need a couple of extra servers. For instance, they need ADFS servers, ADFS proxies, DearSync service, etc. You can use that in Azure. For instance, DearSync is a very lightweight operation. It runs a couple of times each day. It can be very small machines that cost like 30 or 50 bucks a month. And it's really hard to have that kind of low cost on your own data centers, a server that costs that little. So that's a good choice as well. And what we talk about mostly today in this session is development machines. You can use whatever laptop you like, or tablet or whatever, but you have your farms in Azure instead. You can have, depending on the security in your organization, you might need a tunnel to them. You might have them connected to your own domain controllers, etc. But the key thing is these are throwaway machines. When you're done, or they broke or whatever, just throw them away and spin up a new one. And as I said, you can have 20 or 50 different environments with different configurations. And as an IT pro, I mostly work as an IT pro and test different SharePoint configurations now. So this is a really good way for me to test out how does these configuration scripts work, etc. I can use 15 servers and test on that. I can't do that on my laptop. I don't have those resources. This is actually also a really good option for this in the continuous integration. When building out big solutions with SharePoint, we can use, of course, as previously in the previous slides, we have our development servers, but we can also use Visual Studio Online or GitHub or anything that we publish our code. We can have a TFS, a build server that gets this code, compiles it, builds it, and then with script builds out this new SharePoint form every night, test your code, and you run automatic testing on that. And when it's done, it kills all those machines. Of course, you get a report next morning. So you can actually testing everything from building out new form to testing your new release or upgrading your new release for a in a very, very cost-efficient way. That's the whole idea behind this. So before we go into more details, there's a couple of things that's really important to understand with Azure IAAS. And I had done a similar session a couple of times over the last 2 years now, and this section changes all the time because they're constantly innovating and making up new things and new features in Azure IAAS. So when you read these slides with next to 12 months or something, they might be changed, as some things might have changed. But first of all, we need to choose what kind of machines do we want. There's a couple of options. We have the A machines, the D machines, the DS, and the Godzilla machines. A machines are what Microsoft started with, and those are the basic machines you can use. Comes in two flavors, basic or standard. The basic tiers are for A0 to A4. A0 is the smallest machine you can get. It costs you about $10 a month running that machine. So it's very cheap. But it's a shared core, 768 megabytes of RAM, so it's a very small machine. Not recommended for anything but small testing or development domain controller, for instance. A4 is the sweet spot when it comes to the A servers. And I said there's the two tiers as well, the standard and basic tiers. Standard has better SLAs, better performance, costs a little bit more. For development scenarios, I normally use the basic tier. The D series have faster CPUs, more RAM, but they also have, all our Azure virtual machines has a D drive. That's your temp drive. But for the D machines, that one is an SSD drive, so it's really fast. So if you have something that requires a fast disk, D machines are better. But now you're thinking, oh, SharePoint needs fast disk. Let's put my search index on that drive. You shouldn't do that, or SQL service or whatever, because that drive will, when Microsoft patches Azure, they will wipe that drive. So it's a really temporary drive. You can put the SQL Server temp DB there, because that's always rebuilt every time you restart SQL Server.
What about page files?
Page files, yeah, you could do that. But don't SharePoint log files could be an idea, but then you must be sure to copy that, and also might do some stuff. The Godzilla machines are extreme machines. They cost the G5. It's 448 gigabytes of RAM. It's basically it's 500 gigabytes of RAM, 32 cores, and it costs you like $7,000 to run each month. It's $10 an hour, so it's very expensive. But the DS and D series have actually premium disk support, which was released to GA 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And premium disk is a new storage type that you can actually have all your disks in SSD. So you can get a really good performance. So if you're building out a SharePoint farm, I will look at the DS series for production use, because then you can, depends of course, on your web front ends might not need SSDs, but your search servers and SQL servers. So virtual disks, I think that's one of the most important things with IaaS. You need to know how to optimize those. And all disks are stored as blobs in something called a storage account. And the storage account has different flavors. They might be globally replicated. It might be a standard or basic or the premium tier. But you can, yes?
Ideally, wouldn't you use your storage, like a separate storage and present that in SQL rather than local disks? Wouldn't that be a much better practice?
No, you can't store to Azure storage, no, directly. Okay. No, so when it comes to the virtual machines, that is stored. You will see it more obviously in a couple of pictures later, but your VHDs are stored in the storage account as a blob. So you're storing everything in there. You have a different, when you create a new virtual machine, you choose from a set of VHD templates. Microsoft has tons of them in there, Windows servers, Linux servers, anything you want. But you can also bring your own templates. For instance, when building out production SharePoint farms, we create our own customers' templates and have with SharePoint installed and everything with the right CU, etc. And just sysprep those machines and upload. If you want to move your on-prem stuff, servers to Azure, you can use the virtual machine converter. And it's also, since a couple of weeks back, it can convert to VMware as well. The thing is, you must convert your machines from dynamic to static disks before moving them to Azure, because Azure does not support dynamic disks.
Those are only Gen 1 as well for the hyper.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Gen 2 is not supported yet. When you create the machines, until last week, the operating system disk, the C drive, only supported 127 gigabytes. It's now supported to have OS disks up to 1 terabyte. This was an issue with when we migrated from on-prem to Azure, if you had a bigger OS image. Do not store anything there. Since it's only by default 127 gigabyte, but that we're limited to IOPS in Azure. So we want to move everything off the OS drive into to other drives to get more optimum performance. Yeah, that goes for on-prem as well, of course. There's a temp disk that I mentioned that we shouldn't store persistent information. Paging file is a good example. Then we can have up to 16 different data disks, and they can go up to max 1 terabyte each. Here's a couple of examples of machines. And what you should notice here is the right-hand column, which is important. If you take a look at A4, which is what I think is a really good example of what you could use to build out a SharePoint machine, it can actually have 16 extra data disks. And to get maximum IOPS, 500 IOPS is the standard tier, so we can get up to, what's that? 8,000 IOPS, yeah. If you use the standard tier, it's a little bit lower. But if you choose D4, it's more RAM in that, but you can only have 8 data disks. So that you have to find your sweet spot for your application and what your usage are.
How much cost?
And A4, if you have an MSD subscription, I don't know how much in dollar, it's $100 or something like that you get each month.
Depends, 100 or 150.
Yeah, exactly. But but it's about $100. And if you work 8 hours a day, you can have one of these A4 machines running all the time, basically. You get them for free in the MSD.
Is it easy to switch the
Yeah.
frame size?
Yeah, it's easy to switch. There's a couple of caveats, but we'll come to that later. But start with an A4. You can start with an A3, possibly, if you're not doing development with search or anything like that. For development, yeah, you could go down here. It's a little bit slower, but the pricing isn't that much difference. Then you also have to create virtual networks. Nothing specific to say there, except never go into your virtual machine and change the IP address on the network card. That's not supported. It will break your machine. You will. The only solution is to basically remove that machine if you go in there and fiddle. So it's not supported because it's signed with the DHCP. Here are our different regions. It's important to know, of course, you want your data or your service as close as possible to you because of network latencies. So if you operate in the US, you, of course, create your virtual machines there. Or if you're like me, I live in Sweden, but I still spin up my machines in East US. Yeah, because that's the cheapest place to have virtual machines. The cost different, it's a different cost depending on your data centers. And that's tax issues and electricity costs and cooling costs, etc. So, and most expensive is in Asia. So you can go in at the Azure website and take a look at the different, how much it costs actually. But East US is the cheapest one. And of course, that's the only location right now that has the Godzilla machines. What? Yeah, I think it's quite fast actually. I use it for development. So if you're using it for development 8 hours a day, then you should probably put it close to you because then you're sitting in an RDP session all day, then you want fast responses. But when I'm building out farms and testing that kind of configuration, I don't bother that much about RDP stuff. I want to build out a lot of machines fast and cheap. Another really important thing to think about is availability sets. Remember, Azure, your Azure virtual machines, runs on the Azure Fabric, and they need to patch their Hyper-Vs in Azure sometimes. And it wouldn't be, they couldn't have any SLAs if they just booted their virtual machine, their Hyper-V, and all your machines went down. So therefore, they introduced something called an availability set. So you can group your important machines. For instance, I group all my web servers together, my application servers and SQL servers. And Microsoft guarantees that we will not there will at least be a couple of those up running at the same time. So you get high availability. And you actually get a warning in Azure if you don't create an availability set and have 2 of them in there, because then you're not in a supported mode. So if you're doing production stuff and want to believe on the SLAs and want money back, etc., if something goes down, you need to have availability sets with at least 2 machines in each availability set. So this is important. Previously, we had something called Affinity Groups. You can still use that, but it's no longer recommended to have Affinity Groups. And the idea with Affinity Groups is, imagine a data center. It's like a couple of football fields big, and when you request a new machine, one might end up in one end and the other one in the other end. So you might have network latencies between those machines. And the idea was that if you spin up a machine and put them in an affinity group, they should be as close as possible to each other. Namely, they'll be in the same container or same rack or something like that. But the issue with that is when Microsoft adds new machines, for instance, they add the D and DS series and the G series coming, your affinity set is tied to a set of containers, and the new machines only go into new containers. So you will never be able to move from an A3 to a G5 if you want to do that. So you're locked to your machines. So don't use this anymore. There are still like some valid reasons to use it, and it's if you really, really need fast networks, then it's still a reason to use affinity groups.
Wouldn't it make sense to use it for the SQL and SharePoint communication?
No, the reason why it's not recommended anymore is that they actually have so good networks within those data centers today. But yeah, if we're counting sub-millisecond latencies, if that's important, if you're shuffling large loads of data between, you might consider it. Everything is grouped into cloud service. Cloud service is basically a collection of machines that has endpoints. So that's a grouping within Azure. And the cloud service owns the endpoints and the load balancing around those. It's a very important thing for SQL Server availability groups that you cannot, if you use SQL Server always on availability groups, you need to have the availability group in a separate cloud service from SharePoint, for instance. So that has to do with the endpoint. So you can't load balance the always on availability group within a cloud service. So the load balancing is built into the service, into the cloud service. It's round robin. It can be a public or an internal one. You can have up to 50 endpoints per machine. And it's also taking the availability sets into consideration. So when Microsoft reboots a machine, it's automatically taken out of rotation. Here's an example how a SharePoint farm could look like. I have 3 cloud services, one for domain controllers, and then using local redundant storage. Then I have one cloud service with 3 availability sets for the distributed cache, web servers, and application servers. Also using local redundant storage. I could actually use app services, those for search. I could use the premium storage instead. And I have a SQL Server cloud service and availability sets using premium storage. And here's my file server witness in this case. It could be in the same availability set, but it shouldn't, because if I put that one in the availability set, it might take those two machines down, and only my file service witness is still left. So you have to do some architecture and thinking about this when building out it. But also the big constructs you should use and think of. So let's take a look at the Azure portal. I should ask, how many of you have worked with Azure portal and built out virtual machines? Good. So you're pretty familiar with this view. You've seen it a couple of times. Imagine you have 100 virtual machines. It's a mess working with that right in here. So how many of you use the new portal? It's far better. So wasn't that long ago they introduced virtual machines in here as well. We have almost the same thing in here. We can browse and find our virtual machines. But we still have that long list of virtual machines in here. See? And as you can see, I have some of them in Europe, some of them in East US. A couple of them in here. You see the warnings here? Can go click on that one. And that's because I have a misconfigured availability set. I need at least one more machine and put this one put those two in the same availability set. It's a basic A4, 8 cores and 14 gigabyte of RAM. As you can see here. And I think the monitoring is really good actually nowadays as well. And we have a lot of things. Scale. You need to create an availability set, etc. to do some of these things, or go to the old portal. Yes, it's fairly straightforward. How many of you create virtual machines in here? How many of you use PowerShell? Yeah, it's 50-50. There's a couple of new things, interesting things here, and specifically something called the resource groups that we'll take a look at later. But the idea is that you have everything in here. You work with the storage accounts, the cloud service, etc., etc. And the only downside, as I can see it, is that it's hard to delegate the permissions today with the virtual machines. The resource groups make that much easier. Another thing when I talked about developer machines that I forgot to say is that you can have this under different subscriptions. Most likely your company have an enterprise subscription. And at my company we used a method where we actually set up a new subscription for a customer, for our developer machines. So we can charge our customer for our developer machines. And they're fine with that because they know exactly how much time we spend working with those machines, and that's a good service for everyone. It's a win-win, and some of those machines will leave over to the customers as well, so they can take those development machines and continue with them later, instead of us having to fiddle with that on our own laptops, and they know where the data is and that kind of stuff. So that's a really good way as well. Use the enterprise agreement, and they only get one bill during development as well, from us in that case. Okay, let's jump on back. This was a short demo. You can go in here. That is a very new release. It's in the preview, actually, for virtual machines specifically, and calculate the cost of them. You can add, I need 3 of these, and 2 of these, and 5 of these machines, and see exactly how much it will cost. Use that link. Downside is that link does not work on Internet Explorer. You have to use Chrome. They have some Angular issue, Angular JavaScript issue. This is one of the most important pages around Azure. If you work with SharePoint, you know about the boundaries and limits page for SharePoint. This is a corresponding thing for Azure. So you need to look through that one when you do design of and build out your farms. For instance, we have this thing. Do not place more than 66 highly used VHDs in a storage account to avoid the 20,000 total request rate limit. So I said you can have 16 disks on a machine. And if you have in a large search server farm, that might come into account. Then you can kind of perhaps only have 5 or 10 servers in that storage account. So you need that planning. Otherwise, you're limited by the servers, and your end users will start complaining. So that's really important. And that was for basic machines. And basic is 40 highly used VHDs for the standard account, which is 500 IOPS. So on that's perhaps 4 servers. If it's 4 search servers, it's not that big. It's not a big search server farm. So imagine when you have a search server farm with 50 servers, you need a lot of storage account and do that kind of planning as well. So now I've been talking for quite some time. I will talk a little bit more before we go into the demos of the Azure Resource Manager. But as I started this session, when I planned out this session half a year ago, I had a couple of scripts and XML files, etc., that I used to provision out SharePoint farms and SharePoint machines. And that's one option you can do, still totally valid and works. Basically, you have your own PowerShell scripts to download someone else's. There's a lot of them up on GitHub. You can even build your own console applications and deploy virtual machines. You can use Chef. That was my second idea. I do this session with Chef instead. Chef comes from the Linux world, but it's basically, you have recipes on how to provision machines, etc., supported now in Azure. But then Azure Resource Manager, it's been out for a year or something like that in preview. Since this morning, I haven't read any official announcements, but suddenly everything works. And Azure Resource Manager is the future of provisioning stuff in Azure. And that's how they should have done it from the beginning, but they needed to be fast out with all the services they have. But basically, in a resource group, you have different resources, and you can deploy them or orchestrate the deployment using a very simple command and a JSON configuration and JSON-based template. So I use a JSON-based template, a couple of PowerShell scripts, and specifically I use decide state configuration to configure my domain controller, all the machines, SQL Server, and SharePoint. And this is what we're going to take a look at. But the resource manager is the new way of working with resources in SharePoint. It's template-based, and there's tons of templates, both community-wise and created by Microsoft out on GitHub. You have the link later in the deck. And there's also a new PowerShell mode. So actually you switch mode in your PowerShell commandlets to go to the resource manager mode and having a new set of commandlets. The first we saw of the resource manager was actually the SharePoint server farm, the wizard in Azure. And I'm sure a lot of kittens died that day they deployed this one. It's despicable. This is not how you should build out the SharePoint thing. And it's both expensive, it doesn't work at all, everything is just bad about it. So don't use it. This will be better, specifically now with Resource Manager. And actually, this template is still available as a resource template in Resource Manager. But when you download it, it's empty, probably because it's that bad. That's yeah, there's something, some comment in there. It's left empty for some reason. Oh, the thing that makes it really expensive is that if you build it out this one, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 servers, all on production licenses, SQL Server always on, enterprise SQL Server, production license. So if you do this as a developer, yeah, you can say goodbye to your salary that month. So I created my own template for this instead, and it looks a little bit weird, this picture, but this is the official icons that I received. But basically, I'm creating first a storage group and then a virtual network. Then I create 2 cloud services. Once these cloud services are created, I create 2 virtual machines. One for the domain controller, one for SharePoint. And once the domain controller has started, I fire up a decide state configuration script that creates my domain controller and configures that machine. It creates domain, adds some users, etc. And this is done in parallel. But this script is waiting for the DC script to finish. And when that's done, this one will join the machine to the domain, and it will do some configuration. It will install SQL Server, if I recall correctly. No, that's SQL Server. This one just joins its domain and some other settings. And when that's done, this one will install SQL Server and create a SharePoint farm. All done with the PowerShell and a JSON template, Azure Resource Manager template. But the thing is, if you do your own scripts, it's hard to do this, have this parallelism and these dependencies that you can have. So basically, we can have 50 servers and build them out at the same time. So this will not take. It takes 2 hours, between 1.5 and 2 hours to run this script. And it doesn't take longer if I have 50 servers. That's the whole idea. Oh, perhaps a little bit longer because I need to wait here for the others to join the created farm. And the other idea is that this is a template that you, and template and its desired state configuration. So if I do some changes to this one and run the template again, Azure Resource Manager will make sure to apply your template again on top of this or run everything that has changed. But you can, as soon as you created this farm, you can save that template and reuse it as well. So let's take a look at this. First of all, let's take a look at, where did you go? Here. Let me show you this script. It should be a little bit bigger. This is the script I used to create my farm, basically. I import the Azure module, retrieve the get the module, and make sure that it has version 0.8. It's required for Resource Manager, but just install the latest one. Now I need a couple of things. I need a subscription name for your subscription, a name of a storage account. That's a storage account that we will use to store our configuration files. It has nothing to do with the actual farm or the virtual machines. It's just a storage for your files. And a storage container, which I call scripts here. Do authentication, so actually authenticate to Azure. Select my subscription. And then there was some funky stuff here. Basically, I create the new, this is standard Azure PowerShell. I create a new storage account, get the context, I create a new blob container, and I set permissions on that blob container to be public, so anyone can download stuff from that one. Then I should actually switch. I switch back, yeah, sorry. It shouldn't be there. What I do here is actually get all my files in my extensions library and copy those to this blob storage. And also this JSON file here. Then I use switch Azure mode to Azure Resource Manager, so I can use the Azure Resource Manager command instead. And I create a new resource group. I give it a name, a location, and first I check if it exists, otherwise I create it. And here's the thing, when you're using my script here, you need to have lowercase name of your resource group, because I'm basing the storage account names on the resource group name. And storage account name has to be lowercase. And don't have it longer than 8 characters or something like that, because then, hopefully over time I will improve those scripts so you can have anything in there. Then, let's scroll down a bit. Then I ask for like that. I ask for some credentials, because I need credentials so I can have a domain admin username and domain admin password. And I will actually use the same password for all my service application accounts as well. This is develop machine. This is not production code. I do not support anything, but it works. So I get at least one username and password. And the admin username cannot be administrator. It has to be something else, because Microsoft have blocked that for you to create accounts that called administrator. I give it by default a name using resourcegroupname.com and the domain NetBIOS name and the resource location, East US in this case. So this is a set of parameters I use. Then I use this new Azure Resource Group Deployment commandlet, put in my name there, the template parameter object, which is these parameters, and the template URI. And this is actually a file uploaded to my storage account, and that's that JSON file I talked about. We haven't looked at it yet. And you can use that file. I won't guarantee it will be there tomorrow, but it's public now. And that's the whole idea. It's a public file somewhere. And if we take a look at the Azure Resource Management Template Gallery in GitHub, they have a lot of these files just for public that you can use. I'll show that later. So what's this JSON file then? It's a quite large file of JSON. You can scroll through here. But let's start from the top. Basically, this is a template file where I define a set of parameters that I expect in here. And those were the params we saw in PowerShell just a second ago. I set a couple of variables here. And I can have a specific language how to create these variables in here. For instance, if I use these square brackets, there's some calculation going on by the template manager, and concatenate the parameters called service name and some other stuff, etc., etc., etc. And you can see I set the property here. My DC will be basic A0. My SharePoint will be basic A4. So you can modify this as fits you. Then I have a couple of things down here. We don't have to go into all details. I have some PowerShell commandlets to run. But this is the interesting thing. These are 2 images actually provided by Microsoft. It's the Windows Server 2012 one R2 that I use for the domain controller. And then I use the Windows Studio 2013 Ultimate Update 4, because that image by default has the SharePoint bits installed and the SQL Server bits installed. So I don't have to do that. And it's development license as well. Note that this image only exists on MSDN subscriptions. It does not exist in enterprise agreement subscriptions. But what can you do? You download that image from your MSDN subscription and upload to you. So you can do that. It still works. Or you create your own image with SQL Server, Developer Edition, etc. Then in this file, let's scroll down a bit. I define resources. So there's a lot of resources in here. First of all, I have something called a classic storage account with the storage account name, some properties, and the property we use here is just what storage type I will use. I define the virtual network, the address space, DNS servers. I specify 2 subnets. So each resource has different set of properties. So basically, this part is different in all resources. but they all have a type, a name, an API version, location, etc., etc. Then if we scroll down a little bit more, so a couple of other things I start here. That's a virtual machine. Give it a name, specify the network profile, and as you can see here, I set a static IP address on my domain controller. Open up some endpoints, remote desktop and PowerShell if I need that. I create a hardware profile, and finally operating system profile, and some other scripts. We don't have time to go into everything, but here I specify different the OS disk, and then finally a set of data disks and the size of those. If we scroll down further, we see we use the extension element here as well. And the extension element is, first of all, it's just the BG info, so I can see what kind of machine I log into. But I use this custom script extension a lot. And the custom script extension is something you can add to a machine. You can only have one of them running you only have one of them at a time. So, but you can add, as soon as you add a new one, the old one is removed and replaced by a new one. But every time you boot, this custom script extension is executed. So if you decide state, for instance, it will make sure that this, for instance, the last script that's run in this one is making sure that SharePoint is installed. So every time you reboot the machine, it will check, is SharePoint installed and configured correctly on this machine? If not, it will reconfigure it, which is really cool. And the DSC we use in here, that DSC script is really ugly, to be honest. I don't know how I should put it. There's really cool stuff coming up on that topic, so I didn't spend time doing a good script there. But the key here is that this custom script extension has a set of file URIs, and these are the files I uploaded to my storage account. So when the script runs, it first downloads all the scripts, and then you can execute it. And the good thing is having these up in the public is that as soon as you update this script, the next time you reboot the machine, we get the latest version of that script and execute that. So the next thing I would like to show you here is the depends on. So this, let's scroll to the right. So actually this machine will not start until I have the storage account ready, the network, and domain names, which is just a reservation of the name of the machine. So you can set different dependencies in this template between the resources. And that's exactly how I've done with the different scripts. Yes, the question over there.
So you mentioned you can split data disks, right?
Yeah.
So was it that section you can specify on?
Yeah, exactly. I think I have it on my other machine here. The domain controller has one extra disk. Here's in this example, I have two disks, 2 terabyte data disks, one for SQL and one for SharePoint, for instance. So I can specify those here. Remember, those disks are not formatted, they're just attached to your machine, so you have to do that yourself. And for that, we use a set of scripts. Let's take a look at those. The first script we use is something called prepare machine. This script is borrowed from Microsoft. That's a part of their resource manager thing. Let's zoom out a bit. But basically, this one downloads files, zip files, and extracts them. So I'm just reusing that one. Then I use, which one is it? Oh, there's a common file here as well. This common file is used for, in this case, I'm sending all the passwords in clear text. You might want to crypt that using a certificate, etc. So there's a couple of helper functions to do that if you want to do this very secure. The first thing I do on the domain controller is to run this desired state configuration that we have down here. There's a couple of things. First of all, it's a virtual machine. Make sure that we have high performance power plan. And the desired state configuration, anybody work with that? Basically, it's a script that runs, and it has 3 main methods. This is a script version of it. It has a test, a get, and a set. It always runs the test first. See, should I run the set script, or should I just ignore it? The get script is just used to get some value out of it. So here, test for the current power configuration. Is it like high performance? Then run the set script, so I set high performance. Then I have a couple of other things here in the side state. Make sure that the disk number 2 is added as F, and make sure that we have the AD domain services feature enabled, a couple other features. Then I have created the primary DC, and there's actually a DSC script for that called xAD domain with a couple of parameters. And also this one has dependencies. Make sure that we have the data disk and the Windows features are enabled before I can run this one. I can create a couple of users. AD, SP Farm, SP Swap, SQL Server, etc. So that's basically what we do at the domain controller. And that sets up the domain controller. The thing that I spent at least 40 hours on figuring out was, let's take a look at this one first. For SharePoint, we have a similar thing. Create SP server, that one first. We have a similar thing, fix the power plan, data disk, but then we come to this one. If you ever tried to remotely configure SharePoint using PowerShell, you might know that it always fails when it's creating the content database, and that has to do with the double hop issue. Basically, you're remotely invoking stuff in SQL Server that tries to get stuff from Active Directory. So what you have to do is have Web Services Manager to enable CRED SSP. So we actually can do that double hop and delegate credentials. And to get this one to work properly, I spent at least 40 hours on these few lines just to get them working. And what I do here is basically, on this machine, allow it to delegate and also allow it to act as a server to receive delegates. Yes?
Is there any benefit to taking this approach? Because a lot of the stuff you've shown there, I would probably push via group policy, such as the power plan, for instance. Yeah,
you can absolutely use that. Yeah, absolutely. But now, in this case, it's a development farm. I don't have an AD within a group policies. But in an enterprise scenario, yes, absolutely, you should.
We have to be careful that it's just on a general note, group policies don't coincide with the DSC stuff there, right?
No, that happens to a machine once it joins a domain. But then you already have a domain and an established group policy, etc. So then you have another desired state configuration, then make sure join this domain that's already existing. In this case, if we do everything, it's in just an isolated farm. But the key thing here is what actually happens is, to get this to work, you need to restart the WinRM service. And when you restart the WinRM service, the desired state configuration hangs. So therefore, I moved this one before joining the domain. Because after joining the domain, you have to do a reboot. So it took me a while to figure out. It always stalled and somewhere in here, and it's really hard to debug this as well. But it's up on GitHub now, so you can just get it when you need. Let's jump on over to Setup SP. Setup SP is very similar. This one runs after the previous one when it has rebooted. Make sure that we have the SP setup account into the administrators group, and that account is what we use to set up SharePoint. Actually, I'm not using that. I'm using the administrators because I'm a little bit lazy. But the idea here is that this is the kind of stuff we should do. Make sure we have .NET installed. Anything more there? No? But yeah, as I said, this is run every time I reboot the machine. So if someone removes the account I set in here from that group, it will make sure that it's always there. And I can do the opposite as well. I can make sure that nobody adds a farm account to the administrators group. Okay. I installed SQL Server, as I said. Where are you? Everything is, the bits are already installed. All I need to do is add some features to this one, set some properties on the SQL Server setup module. And same goes for SharePoint, a little bit down here. And also, actually, on this MSDN image, they have a script already, set up a SharePoint farm. It's really bad SharePoint setup, but it works. And hopefully you can replace this with AutoSP install or whatever you want, whatever you prefer. But the idea is that this script already existed on this machine, so you're just using it. And here I'm using set script, and here's another tip for you. As you can see, the other methods here I create using brackets to write out my scripts. But here I'm using a string instead. And that's so I can insert parameters into this one. So I can replace with my domain admin, etc. And because in PowerShell, this is actually treated as a string. But if I enter one of these parameters into that one, it will not evaluate. On the other hand, I don't have any intelligence when I write it like a string. But that's trade-offs you have to do. Okay, so these are the scripts I'm using. And you can see here are the other ones. Here are the different modules. There are zip files right now. I think that's it. So let's jump on over to the grand demo. And it's actually a video. Since this takes about 2 hours, we'll spend 10 minutes on looking on it. And I'll explain the first part of this demo is I'm using a slightly other approach. Until this morning, you couldn't run that script with virtual machines in the templates. So you had to create your own, you had to use the JSON according to the REST endpoints directly and create an app in Azure IAAS. So there's a couple of other things I do here in the beginning that I don't need to do anymore. If you want to take a look at that, scripts are on GitHub as well. But basically the same thing. Here's authentication, I need to log in. But it's basically the same thing. But now the last line, the PowerShell command, creating a new deployment, I did that manually by myself. Because the PowerShell is essentially an app, and that app didn't have those permissions to provision virtual machines, because until this morning it wasn't supported, I guess. So I'm logging in, I'm choosing my subscription. I have a couple of them, so I need to get the right one. I need a subscription ID. In this case, I need a subscription ID to construct my REST endpoint URLs. I don't need that anymore. Then I create a storage account, upload the different files here. You don't have to do that every time, but just when you modify your files. So you upload the different blobs here, and those are publicly available. You can set permissions if you want to do that. But since the desired state configuration is running as the system, entity authority system account. So you need to have an anonymous group here. I create a resource group. Get the credentials. And write in my admin name and the password. I copy paste that password from since I use it in clear text here, I generate the password every time. And this is, instead of have the parameters thing we saw previously, I'm using a JSON structure here that I send into the REST endpoint, and just take a look at the parameters there. Then I have my own function to run the resource management command. First, we can go into the portal and make sure that we can see our resource group. It should be there. There it is. But it has no resources in here. So no deployments are ongoing. You can have multiple deployments ongoing at the same time. Then I run the command. Excuse me. And it will take a couple of seconds for it to start. And essentially, there's a default command that now works the same. It will wait until it's finished. It waits here for 2 hours, basically, and reports any errors that's going on. So if you have any errors in your template, you will get that response back and say, oh, you missed this parameter or whatever. And in a couple of seconds, you will see that this one changes to ongoing deployment. Sometimes you need to just refresh the page. Oh, you can see here it says running. You can click on that one and get details about the current deployment. Here we have a list of the different deployments. And you can see the parameters that I inserted into it. And if you can remember that password, you can log into my machines. The different operations that we started. And we have the different events here. So if anything goes wrong, we can go in and see that very clearly and see exactly what goes wrong. And here are all the operations. We can see when they started executing. And we're about a minute or two in, and it's already created the virtual network and the storage account. So you have 2 resources so far. 4 minutes in, yeah. I think we're speeding up a little bit of time here. Should start, once those are done, it should start creating virtual machines. And what I did there is just close it down and open it up so it refreshes faster. But it's still on 2 resources. Let's wait, I'm speeding up the time a little bit here. And now we can see we have 2 more resources. It's our virtual machines that started to spinning up. And we can go into each of these resources, and normally you don't have to watch it all the time, but the idea is that you can go in and start looking at the virtual networks here. You can see that the virtual machines are already added to the different networks. And we speed up a little bit here. We go into the extensions. That's the scripts. Currently, they're not running because we're still spinning up the machines. But when they start running, we will see that information in here in almost real time. So we're 15 minutes in, and I'm clicking around a bit, checking that status, and that the new operations are succeeding. If any of them fails, I can go in and take a look at, okay, this one failed, what happened, and why did it fail? So we're half an hour in to our deployment, and we can soon see here that it says primary domain controller script is running. So about half an hour in, it starts running that script, and I can go into that SharePoint machine. It should have one script running. Yeah, success. So it most likely configured the disks correctly here. Yeah, so here we can see the operation success, and you can see the output of that operation. And that was the prepare machine that created the, formatted the disks, etc., etc. And then it starts downloading the next script once the domain controller is ready. And what do we have? Now it's trying to join the domain here. It's a little bit hard to read this output here, but you need to know what you're looking for. We configured the web service management. We configured the web plan. Actually, there's commandlets for this to get this data out, and so you can format it better if you want to. It's about 1 hour in. It's still trying to join the domain. And I think it succeeded. No, yeah, it succeeded. So now it started installing SQL Server, and everything is going really fast now. There's the SQL Server process, SQL Server install process, and that should take about 15 minutes or so. So we're 1 hour, 10 minutes in. And now we have, yeah, first of all, it runs the script, install SharePoint, and it checks the get is SharePoint installed, and then it starts the set method which is install SharePoint. So after 1 hour and 10 minutes approximately, it starts installing SharePoint, or configuring SharePoint. SharePoint is already installed on that image. So I can log into the machine using RDP. The only disadvantage with IAAS is that it's really slow to start. I don't know why, but the disks are really slow the first time you boot into it once it's been idle for a while. So SharePoint is slow the first like 5-10 minutes, but then it's on an A4 it's really good performance. You can take a look at the disks are provisioned correctly here. Take a look at the F disk. I think everything is an F in this demo. Yeah, we have the different files for SQL Server. The databases, and we click on that one, we can see the configuration and central admin database coming up there. And it takes another 20 minutes to get stuff running. Normally I don't go clicking around and wait for and see what's happening, but for the demo-wise we can see in IAAS we don't have any websites yet, so I click refresh a couple of times in here. I can go in and check the status if it's still running. So I don't have any logging whatsoever in that SharePoint desired state configuration here. It's just a starting and then end when it's done. So now you can see we have the web service, SharePoint web services, web application, and the central admin should be there as well. And fairly soon we should have the last one. Yeah, that's the content web application. Open Internet Explorer, and as I said, it's really, really slow to start with. First of all, I'm a little bit too early. It's not fully provisioned yet. It hadn't created any site collections. But we should soon see, yes, working on it. And we're at 1 hour, 38 minutes. And basically we're done there. If we go into look at the script on the right-hand side, we should see it's soon done. Come on. And there we have it, the end set of the SharePoint thing. And we can go back and see that our deployment succeeded. And also my script succeeded. So from now on, if we do configuration to our machines or stuff, we can run the same configuration template again. So it fixes that up using the Azure Resource Manager or desired state. Or we can add new stuff to our resource template to add new stuff into the actual farm. We can also have a dedicated smaller template that just creates an extra SharePoint machine, for instance. if we need to add more machines to it. And we should perhaps define up templates of one web front end, one application server and search service. You have different templates with different configurations. So that's it. All of this, all the codes and PowerShell scripts are on my GitHub on the repo there. So you have the PowerShell script and the JSON templates. And there's an awesome collection by the community and Microsoft of resource management template on the other one. For instance, if you need a SQL always-on availability cluster, that's a ready-to-go template you just can download and use. And for everything in Azure, basically, everything from just a small storage account, etc. But there's one thing that's really, really cool I want to show you. I'm already running out of time, but I want to show you this. Where are you? Browse. Because this will help you a lot. When resource groups, we go into my resource group there. Let's go into virtual machine. Let's say I want to know find out details about this machine here. Come on, load. I'm sorry for missing out on the last tips and tricks, but I mentioned a couple of them throughout the session, and you can find I will upload the slide decks to my site as well. Come on. Let's take the DC. If you go under all settings and properties, you will see that all of these items have a resource ID. Okay, you can click on that one and copy that one, and then go to resources, azure.com, and paste in that thing you copied. And we will actually go in and see the Azure Resource Explorer preview. It's a preview thing, but it's really cool because you see all your resource groups and all your different resources here, and you can get exactly JSON that's used internally. So if you do any configuration in the UI, you can just grab and copy that template from here and insert into your own. And you have everything in here. There's a lot of more stuff that I don't have in my template that's not necessary or default stuff. But if you change the setting or something like that, you can very easily just go in here. And you can also do the operations directly in here. So I can delete this one by clicking this one, or updating data, etc. So if you want to start building out these templates. But as I said, for development machines, you can absolutely use the scripts that are up there now. For more production farms, you should probably write your own script or wait for announcements sometime. Okay, that's it. Let's finish with that slide up there. As I said, there's a couple of extra slides with more tips and tricks on how to optimize performance. But thank you very much for being here. And yeah.